fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. This is going to be a fun episode. Got my boy Lenny Rudow, Fish Talk. Got Fish Talk Magazine, YouTube channel, obviously an online area with all kinds of how-tos, where-tos, and reviews. And I want to give a shout-out to Jeffrey Lewis real quick. I had someone had mentioned Lenny's name in a prior comment somewhere on iTunes. I couldn't find it, but Jeffrey is the one that sent me a message recently saying, you've got to get Lenny on the show. And so Lenny, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Joe, thank you for having me.
I told you this offline, but I appreciate you and the fact that I sent you an email. You responded really quickly. And for those of you who've never run a podcast, it's not easy getting guests sometimes. There are people who are very intimidated by being on a podcast or being interviewed at all for radio or TV. They don't know what to say. They're nervous. And many of my guests, not throwing them under the bus, but I'm really telling this to future guests, is you don't have to be worried. You don't have to be scared. And guys like Lenny, he just says, I'm in. Doesn't even ask what we're going to talk about. He's like, let's just go for it. So, dude, I appreciate you. And I know you've done, who knows how many countless interviews and probably seminars and YouTube videos and your, what do you call it, Live with Lenny now on your YouTube channel?
Yep. I honestly have no clue how many type of thing I've done. No idea whatsoever.
And written quite a few books as well. Yep.
Got six books focused on fishing, mostly in the Mid-Atlantic area, Maryland, Chesapeake Bay.
Yep.
In some cases ranging up and down the coast, but pretty good number.
I'd say so. I saw a stat that it was like 90-something% of people desire to write a book, like it's a dream or a goal to write a book in their life, and it's like 1% actually do. And in fact, you've got 6 of them. Well done, brother.
Well, thank you.
So one of your latest ones, I want to kind of go into that first and have it be one of the features, is the Guide to Mistakes Anglers Are Making, or what is the title? I don't have it in front of me. Okay.
Mistakes Anglers Make.
So how did that come about? Besides the obvious reason.
Actually, it came about because I realized that not only was I, like everybody, making some mistakes when I was fishing, I was actually making mistakes that I learned about 20 years ago and then forgot that I had learned about.
That's funny.
And the genesis of the book, it actually started when I was fishing with my wife and one of my sons. We were pickerel fishing. And I had my old standby, my minnow on a shad dart under a bobber, and I was like, this works, this has always worked, this is the rig. Well, my son got a little bored of not catching fish at one point. He took the bobber off, he started casting and retrieving, and he started catching fish. And he caught about 10 fish before, and I hadn't caught a thing, before the little light bulb went off in the back of my decrepit brain and said, dude, you're making a mistake here. You're stuck in a rut. Pay attention to what's going on.
Bobber holding you back.
That was actually the very first thing that got me going on that book was just, the big mistake there was I fell into a rut. I've been doing the same thing for 20 years. It should work, right? Well, it wasn't working. Guess what? Change it up, So that started it.
So I'm curious, in that case, because we've done some videos too, using popping corks, bobbers, whatever you want to call them. What was the reason there in that particular instance?
I have absolutely no clue whatsoever. None whatsoever. I could not tell you in 1,000 years. All I know is, for whatever reason, getting rid of that bobber and just giving it the slow, twitchy retrieve was totally working. And leaving that bobber on there, you just weren't catching nothing. So live and learn, right? Sometimes
so fascinating.
Fish, yeah.
It's we talked about it before, my brother and I. It's just like this never ending puzzle. I mean, we learned. I guess it was this past week. We went down to the Everglades. We have this insider club, and we had this member kept posting these monster snook that he and his wife were catching, and he kept saying it was on these artificial lures. And I know you've been all over the place. You've been out here in Florida, and it's not that hard to catch a snook in general just to get a strike. But when you start talking about 40-inch snook and bigger, that's a whole different class. That's a whole different ball game. And this dude's catching them on fake shrimp, and which I've never done. I've used DOA shrimp and some Z-Man shrimp and caught snook, but I was like, that seems unheard of. You have to have live bait. And we went down and spent the day with them and saw exactly what they were doing. So it was a what and a how and a where. Like, they had all three of those things dialed in, and they were fishing areas I never would have fished. I would have driven right over them. And it was like an eye-opening moment. I was like, holy crap, here I am, in my early 40s, been fishing forever and been fishing for snook forever. And I learned something that I had no idea about. And I think that's so cool about fishing, right? Which is probably what keeps you going is the learning and the sharing, which is why you're putting out so much content and now 6 books. Talk about that. Talk about some of the other aha moments and kind of mistakes along the way.
I could not agree with what you're saying more. And it's really funny because it is this ginormous web of factors. And I'm sure every angler knows this, but as you're fishing, you're running through these things in your head, one after the next: the tide, the current, the wind, the sunlight, the color of your lure, the size of your lure, the shape of your lure. Did you pick the right thing? Blah, 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 blah. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And this is what I try and tell people, oftentimes when I'm doing seminars or whatnot and talking about the book. This is exactly what I'll tell people. You know what? You can spend $1 million on the best boat, the best rods, the best line, the best lures, the best bait, the best everything. One little mistake, and you're not going to catch a dang thing. Mm. And, the example I always like to use is bug repellent. The active ingredient in bug repellent is DEET, right? Yep. There's one scientifically proven fish repeller on the face of the planet. I'm sure you know what it is, right? It's DEET.
Let me guess. Yeah.
So, you're in the right time at the right place, doing the right thing, doing everything right, and you get bit by a mosquito and you take out the bug repellent, you slather it all over the place, you get it on your hands, then you pick up your rod, you reel your lure, you start casting, you're not going to catch any fish. It's amazing. One little mistake, poof, you're done.
So let's go down that path, because we've never done a podcast on that. And what was it called? Smell tracks, right? Is that the term that what's his name? Paul Johnson. Did you read that book, The Scientific Angler?
No, that's interesting. I haven't heard that term. That's cool though. I like it.
So have you heard of that book though, The Scientific Angler?
I can't say I have. I've heard of the company.
It was this was prior to that. I believe the author's name is Paul Johnson. I believe he's passed away. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. It's an older book. You got to pick this thing up as someone who reads and obviously writes books on fishing. It was the first time I had ever heard of it, and he called them smell tracks. And it hit me too, just what you're saying. I was like, holy crap, I never thought about it. And he started testing all of those, and he did say mosquito spray. He said even leaving, let's just say you're using mono, because at the time I don't even think braid had really come out yet, but he was talking about mono line. A lot of guys like my dad, he would leave a lot of his stuff in a little garage, the same garage that he kept, gasoline cans for the boat and a little John boat and even a lawnmower. And even that gasoline was absorbing into your mono, and that was literally turning fish off. That he could drop down in anywhere from 10 feet of water to 100 and drop down brand new mono straight off the shelf. And then he'd have the mono that had been sitting in someone's garage with gasoline canisters with a little bit of fume coming out there for a couple of weeks. And the fish would not even get near that other line with the exact same live bait. I mean, it's pretty
Scientific Angler.
It's pretty, yeah. You got to read it. There's some stuff that's been outdated on it. once again, you have braid, and all of a sudden now there's new electronics and all this that he didn't really have at the time. But it is really fascinating. Called these smell tracks, and as soon as you said that,
I wrote the title down, man. I'm going to get it.
Yeah, Paul Johnson. I don't even know if it's in. They're making it anymore, but you can definitely find it on Amazon. So, I love this stuff. So, what else? What other things like that besides the DEET? What are some other of those big mistakes that you've learned over the years and talk about in the book?
Well, here's a funny one, and I don't know if you all have a similar experience in Florida, but you can go to the tackle shop right now, and I don't know, you're going to find like 3 million different colors for your lures. I mean,
yeah.
There are a million colors out there, right? And there are a million that are a million different colors all mixed together. And then you got guys who like to take the magic markers and the colorations, and they customize all their lures and all this, blah, 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 blah. Bottom line, if you actually fish lures side by side for a little while and just do a little experimentation, you will find, without exception, that they're basically like, 3 colors: white, chartreuse, black, sometimes pink. And once you get beyond those, you're really not having much of an effect on the bite. Pretty much. Maybe that shine loose, crazy electric chicken is going to work really good one day, but on that very same day, the white will probably work just as good. In fact, almost certainly. So the old saying, I'm sure you know it. The lures on the tackle shop shelves are often made to attract the fishermen.
Yep.
More so than fish, and that is very, very true. Very true. And I see so many guys who they lug this ginormous tackle box onto my boat. It weighs 80 pounds. They've got 10,000 different jigging spoons in it, and each one of them is 1 to 6 ounces. And I'm just like, dude, what are you doing?
And they have different colors, and right, you can't have just one color jigging spoon.
Okay, no, if you look at your selection of 3 ounces spoons, you might have 10 different colors in there. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. It's totally crazy. But I guess God bless the tackle companies. They sell this stuff. We buy it, right?
So is white? You mentioned white, chartreuse, and you say black, or some kind of darker
absolutely.
Color? Okay, is that kind of your go-to up there too?
Yeah, okay. No question. So up here we got a couple sayings. If it ain't white, it ain't right. If it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. I don't know a saying for black, but if you're night fishing, that can be a really effective color. And there, like I say, there are times pink is a real hot color sometimes, purple's a real hot color sometimes, but the vast majority of the time, you really stick with your basics. Stick with your basics. That's normally what catches the fish. There are exceptions, but just painting with a broad brush here, speaking in general, those basics do the trick. Would you say the same for Florida?
Oh, for sure. And so we came up with actually we teamed up with Z-Man on the first run of it, and it's a lure color called Slam Shady. And guess what? It's based on what you just said and the science behind it, and asking tens of thousands of anglers if they could just have one color, what do they caught the most fish off of? And white or pearl, came up as number one. And this is really this is Texas to kind of North Carolina is about north, because we're targeting basically redfish and speckled trout, flounder, and snook down here in Florida and parts of Texas. And white/pearl was number one by far. And then you and I talked about it offline. The number two thing was like gold or gold spoon, and then chartreuse. And so we created it's a white, a swim bait, a paddle tail that had it's like a translucent kind of white pearl that has just the right amount of gold flakes and some silver flakes to give it a little bit of flash, but not too much. And the thing just it's never gonna be the only lure you ever need. But in general, it's what we go with. It's what my brother and I lead with. It's a great search bait. And it just flat out, it catches fish because it's so simple. And from far away, you would just say, "Oh, it looks like a white paddle tail, a white swim bait," and that sucker just works over and over and over again. I think it's up to it's now past 70 different species it's caught here in the last 10 months.
Have you trialed it on the Chesapeake Bay yet?
I have not personally. We have had some people who have used it up there. I know there's been some stripers caught. I don't know about anything else that I know with like definitive, but I know there's been some stripers up there that have been caught on it. And once again, it's simple, right? It's, you got a 3.5 to 5 inch swim bait that's white with a little bit of gold. Of course, it's going to work.
I think it merits further examination on the Chesapeake. You know where I'm going with this, right?
We're have to send you some, brother. Well, I'll get your address after we get off this. I would love for you to test it out.
Always love trying new stuff. You know, it's funny. We had a feature in Fish Talk, just about 2 months ago, where a guy who is one of those highly math brain engineering types actually looked at the visual range of the striped bass, which of course is our number one game fish up here, and matched it up with the visibility of different colors in the spectrum as you move down through the water column. And interestingly, Chartreuse was the one color that lasted throughout the water column until you got down so deep where everything just appears to be shades of black and white.
Yeah.
So I found that really fascinating, and it totally holds true with that old saying, if it ain't Chartreuse, it ain't no use, because 1 minute you cast it in 3 feet of water and it's highly visible. The next minute you drop it down to the bottom in 30 feet of water, and guess what? It's still highly visible.
Interesting.
To the rockfish at it.
And so,
I thought that was fascinating.
What did white do?
He did not look at white. He looked solely at Chartreuse and tried to sort of make a scientific case.
Got it.
For why it works so well for stripers.
Interesting. Yeah, it's so fascinating
article.
Yeah, just to see, you and I go into a tackle store, and you made a point earlier. You see, I don't know, let's just say it's 1,000 different colors, and yet you take all that stuff underwater, even in just a couple of feet of water, and depending on obviously the sunlight and the visibility of that water, it completely changes. And the deeper you go, all of a sudden, now let's just say you're in 30 feet of water with a little bit of current moving and a little bit of sediment and stuff. Like none of that stuff even really matters that much anymore. Like you can't see any of that stuff. You can't even see how realistic, the bait fish looks. It really is fascinating what fish see underwater versus what our human eyes are attracted to above water in a tackle store. I think that is so intriguing. But then again, even though you and I, Lenny, we know if we kind of know the truth, and yet we're still, even you, right? You heard about Slam Shitty, like, send me some, I want to try it out. We're always constantly wanting to still try it. So we're creatures of habit.
I'm looking around at the stuff hanging on the rods in my racks right now, and I see purple, green, white, pearl, pink, red, blue, gray. You name it. But I'll tell you what, when I start out, it's almost always with a white. Almost always with a white.
Yep. Love it, man. So I want to pivot real quick to this fish talk. How did that came about? You've been in the industry for quite some time, right? Kind of tell me the whole history of how this and your name and brand is all evolved.
So I've been in the industry many, many years. I started off on the boating end of things with Boating Magazine back in the early 90s. And I'd still cover boats quite a bit. I do a lot of boat reviews and that sort of thing. But I've always been a fisherman, and in the Mid-Atlantic region for years and years and years, the Fisherman, which is based up north, had a Mid-Atlantic edition, and it was great. I loved it. I read it all the time. I was a subscriber, and then later on, as I got established in the field, I started writing for him, and I wrote for him for many, many, many years. Still friends with all those folks. They're great people. It's a great publication. But what happened was, in the downturn in 08-09, they pulled out of our region, and they left the Mid-Atlantic, and they continued publication in Jersey, New York, up north. But they never came back. And I talked with a publisher about this actually probably 4 or 5 years ago and said, man, guys that fish the Chesapeake, guys in, southern PA, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, DC, we missed that. We have no real fishing magazine. And we didn't. We haven't had a good fishing magazine here for, better part of a decade. And, he said he got it, but they kind of they were busy with what they were doing, and they weren't even thinking about expanding at that point. And I said, well, dang it, I'm going to do it. And we started up Fish Talk. I partnered with a local publisher who publishes two other magazines, one called Spin Sheet, which is focused on sailing, and one called Prop Talk, which is just a general boating magazine. And since they're local and I'm local, I had written some boat reviews for them through the years, so I knew those folks. I knew it was a good team. I knew it was, honest, hardworking people who I would get along with. And so I came to them 3 years ago and I said, we ought to make a fishing magazine. The Chesapeake and the Mid-Atlantic region, it deserves it. It needs it. There's a need there. And I got to tell you, 3 years later, it's been tremendously gratifying because I hear all the time, thank goodness you guys started this magazine. Please don't stop. And I hear it. I talk a lot of local fishing clubs and stuff like that, and people just really, really appreciate the fact that we've got it. And along with the monthly publication, we also, of course, have a website which just has gobs of how-to, where-to stuff on it, and as well as fishing boat reviews.
And that's fishtalkmag.com, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, fishtalkmag.com.
Okay.
And what we do is there's a little button on the website where people can click on there and give us their email if they so desire. And what we do with that email is once a week we update fishing reports on the website. We have them for throughout the Chesapeake, the area's freshwater fishing, and we also have it for the coastal fishing in the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, along the coast. And they're updated every Friday by noon. And people who opt in get an email, so they get an alert, so they know about it, and it's proven spectacularly popular.
That's awesome. So who are they? You got captains or just locals or contributors? Who does them?
So actually, when I first started this, I wasn't sure how I would handle it, because anyone who's ever put together fishing reports knows when you're talking about an area the size of the tri-state region here, plus a little bit of South PA, plus DC. It's an awful lot to do. So I hired my daughter. My daughter's in her third year of college. She's an inveterate fisherman. She was sending me pictures of the smallmouth bass she was catching this morning. And what she does is on Thursday she calls a list of about 20 tackle shops. We have about a dozen guides on the list. And she calls all these folks, and we also have some people who are pretty diehard anglers who I just know from through the years who help out with this. Oh, and also our magazine contributors. We get a hold of the contributors every week,
yep.
And we get these reports. I think the total number of contacts the last time I checked was somewhere around the lines of 46, 47. And she makes all these calls. She writes up the report, and then she sends it to me. Then what I do is I take the emails. We also ask our readers, please send us reports, send us pictures.
Yep.
And she sends me the reports from all the other entities, and then I incorporate all the reports that all the readers have sent me through the course of the week. And boom, you got a pretty dang good fishing report right there.
That's awesome. That's so smart.
Yeah, it works out really good. And just, it's funny. It gives you an inkling of the level of popularity that it's generated in 3 short years. In the magazine, we include 30 reader photos a month. That's a lot. That's 6 pages of photos, right? That's an awful lot. Currently, right now, as I look at my computer, every edition is filled until October.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're getting just a ton of folks send us pics. So it's very cool. And, we don't ask anybody to, give away their best spot or anything like that. We just say, okay, upper bay, middle bay, lower bay, just give us a general area, and it works out real good.
That's great. Yeah. And I think as it's not so much about the spot, I mean, obviously there are some spots that are better than others, clearly, but fish move, right? One of my guests had said, fish have tails and no fences. What do you think they're going to do? They're not going to sit in the same spot all the time. They are going to move around, and I think that's so important to teach anglers that I was guilty. Like, I grew up thinking, man, as soon as I have 5 good spots, I'm set. I don't need anything else. And I realized pretty quickly one, that if you slept in a little bit late on Saturday and all your spots were taken, you were kind of screwed. And two, that, fish do move. And there's many days where those 5 spots are just skunk zones. There's nothing there. And that was it took my hard brain, my thick skull, many years to figure that out. That's cool. That's a great idea on the reports.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. What amazes me, fish. Obviously, I completely agree. Fish do have tails; they do move. People ask me if a spot's a good spot when I take them there. I say, well, this is a really good spot. It might be hot 3 out of 5 years, or this is an okay spot. It might be hot 1 out of 5 years. You just never know. It changes, and the hot spots rotate through time. What I find fascinating is I'm pretty darn ancient at this point, I'm afraid, and I've actually watched generations of anglers discover spots, guard them with their life, and fight tooth and nail to not have them exposed, and then give up on them because they're crowded. And then, like 5 years later, a new generation of anglers discovers it and goes through the exact same process again. It's hilarious.
That is pretty funny.
It really is. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. And people do get very protective. I got yelled at once for giving away the fact that the Chesapeake Bay Bridge was a hot spot. Now, the Bay Bridge is 7 miles long. It has like 1 million cars go over it a year. It's not exactly a highly guarded secret.
Right. Can you imagine a 7 mile long piece of structure with current ripping through it? Right. I can't imagine that's going to hold fish.
Exactly. And truth be told, go over there on a sunny Saturday, drive over that bridge and look over the side, and you might be able to count 80 boats, 100 boats.
That's funny.
Not exactly tip-top secret, but
no,
it's funny. All
right, I'm curious, and I know the listeners are too, because we all love talking about tackle and lures. So what are, let's just talk about 3, like if your go-to either rigs, lures, just something that you're using constantly in the Chesapeake in particular. I'm curious to know how different it is from down here, or how similar it is.
I don't think it's terrifically different. That 6-inch soft plastic, the BKDs of the world, the paddle tails, on anywhere from a half an ounce to an ounce and a half jig head. We do skirt a lot of our baits. We give them a little bit of extra profile with some skirts, not always, but often. But that 4 to 6 inch soft plastic on a 3/4 ounce is probably my number one bait for the bay. And I'll use that for everything from slinging it for stripers to fishing the shallows for specks. I mean, kind of, you name it, it's a really good go-to lure. Now I'm a jigger. I'm a light tackle guy.
Yep.
But I would be negligent being from Maryland if I didn't mention the old umbrella rig. And not the bass style umbrella rig, but the trolling umbrellas that we use up here. I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone in Florida pull them. They're, you have 2 arms that hold 6 or 8, 6 or 9 inch plastic shad with no hook, and then a leader down the center, another 2 feet, and then a parachute lure trailing either a 6 or 9 inch shad bait.
Okay.
You guys pull them down there?
No, I know what you're talking about though, and I think of maybe some areas of Florida, maybe in the near shore, or maybe some deep inlets. Some guys will try stuff like that. I guess I have never ever used one.
You cannot find anybody in this neck of the woods who trolls for striped bass who does not have that rig on his boat. And if you do, he probably doesn't catch a heck of a lot of fish, because it is a big producer. Of course, it's also like reeling in a bucket, whether or not there's a fish on the end.
I imagine, yeah.
So that's not my personal favorite, but I gotta mention it. And I guess the other one I would throw out at you is, well, this is going to be a weird one. People aren't going to have heard of this. For the sake of argument, let's just say a topwater stick bait. Your badonka-donk type of walk the dog lure.
Yep.
There's a guy up here who hand makes them out of cedar, and they're called Neil Cohen topwater lures.
I'm going to write it down. Neil Cohen.
Neil Cohen. Yep. They're handmade on a lathe. They look like works of art. I mean, it almost breaks your heart to throw them into salt water and ask fish to chew on them. They're just so gorgeous. But that's not even the main attractor. The main attractor is the cedar, and I don't think many people recognize this anymore. The cedar plug will walk a little different than the plastic will. It's just got a little bit of a different motion to it, and it really does trigger strikes. And I'm not a total topwater guy because I like topwater for about the first hour of the day and the last hour of the day. Mm-hmm. And that's really about it because, most of the time, once the sun's up in the sky, I feel like I'm going to catch more throwing the jig. Yep. But, man, you can't beat a topwater bite, can you? Holy mackerel.
And this is the time right now, man. Early mornings in the summer, it's to me there's just nothing better.
Yeah, that explosion, if that doesn't get your blood pumping, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. And so you have, I'm just trying to think of similarities. You have the speckled trout. Those are a blast. Do you guys have the red drum up? Like, I know they've been caught obviously up in Maryland. Do you guys have a bunch of them or no?
We do. We actually have, I'm going to say one out of every somewhere between 3 and 6 years we'll get a run of, slot fish. It's actually on the rare side to get slot fish, 2 summers in a row. It's just sometimes they move in, often they don't.
Yeah.
But what we do get with much better consistency is a August-September run of big bulls, 40 plus pound fish. And it's not an easy fishery to target them. There's not a ton of them around. But what happens is in that time of year, we get a lot of bluefish, mackerel, rockfish kind of mixed up churning bait, Yep. And if you go over to the birds and you get under that kind of frenzy with a fairly heavy lure, you got to get down deep beneath them. You'll find those big bull reds. There will be, a few of them shadowing a big school of bait that's just getting totally obliterated. And I'm not a scientist. I can't say this is true, but what everybody always says is the big ones they're lazy. They're hanging out down there waiting for the chewed fish that got away to sink down to them. That may or may not be true, but those big bulls, they definitely sit down. They might be 20 feet down under the school.
Yeah.
And you might have to spend, a day or two hitting some different schools before you find them. But when you find them, it is game on. They are big fish.
And this is in the Chesapeake Bay, not right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And how far north? Like past like Annapolis? They're not going up there that far, or are they?
No. Every now and again we get a run of the little reds up that far, but not commonly the big ones. It's more often kind of in the Solomons Island to Point Lookout area.
Okay.
And these are fish, down towards the mouth of the bay in Virginia waters. They've got some very good fishing for big reds going on right now. It's been happening since May.
Yep.
And those fish move through the lower portions of the bay. A lot of guys bait fish for them up on the shoals, and they get them mixed with blacks as well. And those fish just slowly move their way up the bay. And I think when they get kind of that Solomons area, that's sort of where they stop. And they kind of ball up there for that short period of time, month, maybe 2 months in that August-September time frame. And then, after that, when they start moving south, the guys down in Virginia waters, they'll get them again. They'll get another shot at them moving back through.
Yeah, too cool. I learned something. I always just assumed that they kind of stopped around that Maryland-Virginia line. I didn't know they kept working their way up. That's too cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say more and more in recent years, as is true in a lot of places, we've had some really weird stuff going on here. Last year, there were 3 documented pompano caught in Maryland waters in the bay. Now, I'd never heard of that before in my lifetime, ever. One case of a gag grouper caught on a wreck.
You're gonna have snook. You're gonna have snook before you know it.
that should not be happening. That's outrageous. Last year, we've always had occasional runs of Spanish mackerel in the middle of the summer. last year was bar none the best Spanish mackerel run really in the entire bay, Maryland and Virginia, of my lifetime. And you can talk to anybody who's been fishing the bay for 30 plus years, and they'll say the same thing. It was just outrageous. We had Spanish Macs everywhere. So, it's kind of crazy. Here's another one for you. Fishing out of Ocean City, right?
Yeah.
Last year, I didn't catch it myself, but someone on our boat caught a triple tail.
Huh. A big one?
Yeah, it was a nice fish. It went to the cooler, believe me. But, that was only the second triple tail I've ever seen in my entire life fishing out of Ocean City. And, another weird one that we saw, we spotted a barracuda. I've just never seen that out of Ocean City. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, huh? And you guys catch them? You just saw them?
The cuda we did not catch. He would not eat. He was hanging out next to a commercial fishing pot,
Yeah.
He was just sitting there just like the mahi or the cobia sometimes do. And he wouldn't have a thing to do with us.
Crazy. All right, I want to pivot over to stripers. Give me the kind of the overall view of where things are. We're dealing with our own issues with red snapper offshore, and even right now, I don't know if you know this, but on the majority of the Gulf side of Florida, you cannot keep redfish, speckled trout, or snook at all. Zero. And I personally think it's a good thing, and I've some people don't agree with me because it's a short-term thing, and I'm in it for the long run, meaning I want my kids, and I've got 3 young kids, and I want their kids to have the same opportunities to fish that I do. So to me, taking a year off is not the end of the world. If it makes sense and science can back it up, which it says they can. The same point, it's a little bit frustrating when commercial guys can go take as much as they want, and their limits are increasing, and the recreational guys who support a big chunk of our country in terms of overall revenue can't take anything home to eat when we want to. So tell me what's going on with all the striper regulations that we're hearing about. It's confusing. I don't even and it seems like every state's got different rules, and if you catch it here, this happens. So what's happening up there with stripers, which is probably your most popular fish?
It is absolutely the number one fish, not only in Maryland and up and down the coast.
Yeah.
Up and down the coast it is. It is horrifically confusing. Some of that is by design, by the powers that be. Unfortunately, the law says that the fisheries managers have to follow the best available science. Doesn't say that there has to be any good science. Now, as I understand it, with the cutoff you guys are facing is due to a big bloom, right? Didn't you have a big bloom and some kill?
Oh, a massive kill, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So we just got over a mahogany tide in the upper Chesapeake, which extended down into the northern portions of the middle Chesapeake. There was a small fish kill in some of the rivers. It wasn't horrible, although the water really was horrible. But the water quality issues that we face are pretty dramatic. Now, you have to bear in mind, very, very important to keep this in mind. One thing that the scientists do pretty much all agree on is that at least 50% and probably closer to 70% of all the stripers up and down the coast spawn in Maryland waters, or in Chesapeake tributaries. Okay? So the Susquehanna, the Potomac, the Rappahannock, these are the rivers that the fish come to spawn. They're here sometimes over the winter, but more often late winter into early spring. They do their thing in the springtime, and then they cruise. Now, when I was young, when I was a kid, we actually had a complete moratorium on striper fishing in Maryland for, I think it was 5 years, might have been 6 years. Yeah, total shutdown, complete and absolute shutdown. Now, back then, when we went fishing, we caught bluefish, and we caught more bluefish, and sometimes we would catch a bluefish. We might luck into a striper once a season, and we would dance a jig and yell and scream and take a picture and put that fish right back in the water.
Yeah.
because we hardly even knew what a striper looked like. They were really, really, really hurting.
Wow.
Now, the moratorium had a dramatic effect. They took it off. We had a couple really good spawning years where the conditions, the weather conditions were just right, just perfect. And the next thing you know, their population just absolutely skyrocketed. Through the early 2000s, the fishing was fabulous. And that goes not just for here, but for the guys fishing for the bigger fish, these breeders, as they migrated up and down the coast all the way up to Maine, right? They're catching them in Jersey, they're catching them in New York, they're catching them everywhere. So population took a big hit, had some not so great spawning years. A lot of people believe they were overfished quite a bit. Anyway, long story short, last year they hit the stock numbers hit the point where when the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission did its survey of the numbers, they said, we got to cut. And, what they do is they make recommendations to the state. The state can do what they recommend or something similar. It can be different as long as it reduces the take by the appropriate amount. And what the ASFMC said to Maryland was, hey, what you guys ought to do is you ought to equally cut recreational and commercial and knock off about 20% of what you're taking. And unfortunately, the powers that be in Maryland said, well, we're going to give the commercial guys a 1.8% reduction, and we're going to take all the rest out of the recreational guys. That's how they started it. Unfortunately, as time went on, things only got worse and worse for the recreational angler, because then they took more of the catch away from the recreational anglers and shifted it to people on charter boats. Mm-hmm. Charter boats right now have a limit of 2 fish per person per day, whereas recreational anglers have a limit of 1 fish per person per day. And just to make it even worse, they dribbled out bits and pieces in different press releases that never quite told the whole story. So the level, you mentioned confusion earlier. Boy, if you want to talk to confused fishermen, just come up here in Maryland and talk to them about who can keep how many stripers where and when, because it is pretty crazy. And now it looks like we're going to have a 2-week summer closure where stripers will be off limits during a time frame when, for many people in many areas, that's kind of, it's certainly the main quarry, and there's might not be a whole heck of a lot of other stuff for them to go after. It boggles my mind, because when you look at the numbers, the recreational fishing community contributes so much more to our economy than the commercial fisheries.
Oh, yeah.
It's shocking. It's not just lopsided. It is utterly shocking. And the fact that the recreational community does not appear to have a voice, certainly not a voice that's heard or listened to, it just utterly shocks me. I'm blown away by it every time something like this occurs. And, it happens over and over again in many different fisheries. Just like you said, you guys have been going through it with the snappers. I hesitate to ask, but, I'd love to know what the commercial take for snappers is versus the recreational take. Where are they allowed, I imagine
it's night and day.
Yeah, I imagine that if you looked at the economic impact on the state of Florida and looked at the take, there would be quite a big discrepancy.
Well, yeah, so you have the commercial guys, then you have the hire for charter guys, and then, the rec guys. And it starts at the top. The commercial guys get the most, and then the hire for charter, the charter boats get a decent amount, and then the rec guys get hardly anything. I mean, that one year it was like 2 days, and it was like, both days rained, and the majority of the Gulf, and everyone was ticked off. But, and I had one of the head guys from FWC came on the podcast, and it was a very good conversation and very open, and just like, who's making these dumb decisions, or not? I don't want to say dumb, that seem dumb to us and not understandable. And he's like, well, here's what happens. We established dates for these meetings where we're all going to come, where the Gulf Council is here, where the states are involved, every decision maker, FWC's there, and the dates are there. And it's open to the public. If 10,000 recreational anglers want to come, we would love to have their voices heard. But he's like, guess what happens over and over again? The entire thing is filled with the commercial guys and their lobbyists. I mean, this is they're an industry by itself, and they have paid lobbyists, lawyers that come in there with them, and they're the loudest in the room. And you might have 3 or 4 rec guys in the back saying, like, feeling intimidated, what am I doing here? And their voice is completely lost. So he's like, that's the shame, is every single commercial guy will show up to these meetings. They're the loudest, they're the squeaky wheel, and they're getting their way over and over again. And the recreational guys just aren't showing up. And now, that's frustrating, right? And man, I'm part of the problem, because guess how many meetings I've gone to? 0. Now I've written in, you're allowed to write in. So I've written in multiple times. You can write in via their site and basically kind of throw your vote or your voice or your ideas. And they do take that into consideration, and they have all that stuff as kind of evidence, if you will, of what we're gonna decide. But man, that's a big part of the problem, is the rec guys, including me, are not showing up to these meetings where they're making these decisions.
Now that's interesting. I can tell you that in the state of Maryland, when they were determining, they had public comment periods.
Yep.
When they were determining the number of fish that were going to go charter versus recreational, right?
Yep.
The commercial thing had already been decided. I can tell you that the public comment was in favor of an equitable distribution by a factor of 5 to 1.
Wow.
5 to 1. And they completely blew it off. And in the following meeting after that, one of the rec guys asked directly the state rep and said, what's it going to take? Does it have to be 99%? You know, when the comments are 5 to 1 for this and you still don't do it, you know, what's it going to take? But the sad fact of the matter is, again, the law requires the managers to follow the best available science. It does not require them to do as the public asks. It simply doesn't.
Right.
So that's actually why, you know, I've taken this tack with Fish Talk, where we're no longer even attempting to fight with the powers that be over this, because it's a losing battle. What we're demanding right now is that we get better science. Because you know what? If a 2-week closure in the summertime is going to lead to a radical reduction in the number of caught and released fish that die, we'll be all for it.
Yeah.
But if there's a 2-week closure purely so that other people can take those fish, that ain't fair.
No.
That is not fair. So we're actually pushing right now for, we're hoping we can get NOAA into this game and get the feds to help fund a study on catch and release mortality on the stripers in the Chesapeake, because this is a huge question. You know, the MRIP numbers on catch and release mortality are just sort of made up from, you know, what they call best available science, which is 20 years old at best and comes from a study that was done in a saltwater pond that said at the end of the study, please don't use this study to calculate mortality.
let's use that one.
Right. Well, you know what? It's all they got. That's what they use.
Gosh.
But the fact of the matter is they've done this with cod and they've done this with haddock in the Gulf of Maine. The technology is there to tag these fish with telemetry tags. They're kind of like the Easy Pass. They work on the same technology. Okay. The fish gets the Easy Pass and they plant the toll booths, if you will, throughout the body of water that you want to cover. And they can keep track of these fish. Where are they going? What are they doing? Well, if they go down to the bottom and they sit there indefinitely, that fish is dead. Yeah. And then they can look back and see exactly what happened to that fish. Was he caught in 70-degree water? Was he caught on a jig? Was he caught on bait? Was he gut hooked? They can look at all these factors, and they did a superb job in determining release mortality on those cod and those haddock. And it blows my mind that it hasn't been done on stripers yet, because it's such an important fish.
Oh, yeah. Huh. All right, well, that'll be another rabbit hole I go down on the podcast. That's cool. I didn't even know that about Maine.
Yeah, I apologize for the rant.
No, I love this stuff, because it's what we're all feeling. I mean, we have a 65,000 person Facebook group, and we hear, and I'm the one that created it, just like you created your thing, and so I get to hear a lot of it, and there's a lot of it's anger and frustration and confusion, and you're right. I mean, science will help out everything, right? And that's why I think we're all frustrated as recreational anglers. There's some big decision that impacts us, and no one can explain why. it's like guessing, and so I get it. I get why it's frustrating. All right, that's good. So let's move to a lighter note, or a really exciting note. Cobia, you guys got some big cobia moving that way right now, right?
It's starting. The reports have been coming in. 2 weeks ago, we got the first reports, which really is more because the season opened than anything else. June 1 it opened in this area. But I tell you what, until you called, I spent the last couple hours staring at my chart book trying to decide if I was going to haul the boat and tow it, or if I was just going to run it all the way down there on its own bottom. They've arrived in the northern Virginia waters, and they're mighty close to the state line, if not there yet. And of course, Virginia and Maryland have reciprocity on the licenses. Yep. So, everybody won't hesitate to go this way or that way, and they're coming. That's an exciting fish. I love the cobia. Boy, is that awesome fighter and an awesome tasting fish.
Oh yeah, a good old cobia steak, tough to beat. What do you use? What's your go-to? Are you using jigs and rigs, and are you going live bait?
So it's funny. It actually depends entirely on the conditions. I think you guys have it a little better than us on the sight fishing gig down there.
Yeah,
because you can see through your water all the time. That's definitely not always the case here. If you have any kind of cloud cover or a serious wind chop on the bay, it gets really, really tough to see in this water. Visibility, is not real good at all. So on a real calm, sunny day, we will sight fish for them. We'll throw live eels. We'll throw larger jigs. Maybe a ounce bucktail with a 9-inch tail, something along those lines. But whenever I go cobia fishing on the bay, or for that matter, I'll do it quite a bit out of Ocean City as well, along the coast. I do two things. I carry that stuff, and I also carry chum.
Got it.
Because when you can't spot them, chumming is really tough to beat.
Yep.
And we'll anchor up, put a chum pot on bottom, and sit out the lines. And it's certainly not as exciting as seeing them and casting to them, but when you get them on the line, it gets that exciting.
Oh yeah, and just chumming in general. I mean, you can catch so many different species that start coming up to the boat. So
yeah,
that's fun. That's cool, man.
We are currently under a cow-nose ray plague, so I'm pretty certain that any chumming activity is going to lead to a 10-to-1 ratio of cow-nose rays, but there's just not much you can do about that.
Well, at least the rays, the cobia will follow the rays in many cases. So you guys just have tons of them, huh?
Yeah, the cow-nose, they breed in the Chesapeake, and so there are none up until maybe mid to late May, early June, something like that. And then there are a gazillion of them. And then they kind of disperse. They're not so bad once summer really, comes into the dog days. But right now there are a lot of them around. In fact, I took a friend out last night just for a quick little evening hop. We left the dock around 6 and just threw some light gear for stripers. And of course, they were thick enough that we managed to snag rays. So they're pretty thick.
Yeah. It's fun. Like if you have someone maybe new, a kid, it's kind of like, catching a shark sometimes. It's like kind of cool, but it's also like, oh man, I just wasted, 10, 15 minutes fighting this thing. And I really want to catch, in your case, a cobia here. So
yeah, absolutely. They do put a big bend in the rod, and the kids do love them sometimes, but wow. It's sort of reminds me of when you go offshore to overnight, and maybe your target's swordfish, maybe it's tuna, and you get sharked to death.
Yeah.
And I've had nights where, all I wanted to do was pull in the lights, stop, and just move, right? Just get out of there and start fishing somewhere else. But the kids on board are like, "Oh my God, look at these sharks!"
So cool. Yep.
Yeah. They love it. And hey, you know what? That takes precedence. That gets priority for sure.
That's right. Well, brother, this has been good. I'm looking at the time here. You're a really fun and great guest to chat with, and we'll have to have you back. And there's so many things we can talk about, and just the Chesapeake alone that we didn't get to touch on. So please tell everyone where they can follow you. And I've watched one of your more recent live with Lenny's. Those are great. And you got your Fish Talk magazine, the website, your books on Amazon. And obviously, if you guys, I know a lot of our listeners tend to listen while they're driving and or working out. So we'll put show notes to all this stuff. So can you give us some links and areas and social media handles and all that stuff to follow you?
Absolutely. So fishtalkmag.com is where it all starts.
Yep.
And then we do have our Facebook page. We're on Instagram. And everything is either Fish Talk or Fish Talk Mag. That's how it all goes.
Keep it easy.
And yep. And I got to say, Joe, it's been a really fun conversation. Thank you so much for having me. And more importantly, if for any reason you ever find yourself in the Mid-Atlantic zone and you got a spare day, you make sure you call because we're going to go fishing.
Oh, absolutely, man. And we'll do some how-to tips, etc. That would be awesome.
I love it.
I'm going right now. I'm going to make sure I'm personally following you on all your social media sites. So everyone do the same. Fish Talk Mag. Lenny, you have been, really, like I said, really fun guest. This has been a blast. And check out the books, too. If you're like me, I love reading books. We mentioned The Scientific Angler. While you're picking that up, pick up all 6 of Lenny's books. They're all there on Amazon. I'll make sure I put the link to that in the show notes at Salt Strong. And vice versa, brother. If you ever get down here, especially in Tampa, St. Pete area, let me know. We'd love to take you out in the boat.
I love it.
All right, my friend, I really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone listening. Thank you for all the love and all the support. And we'll talk to you on the next episode. We're out.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. Find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fishing in her soul.